One of those strategies on Watchpoint Gibraltar that everyone should know about is the loop around through the server room and getting back up onto the high ground behind your opponents. I don't really know if there's a shorter way to describe this or if there's a specific name, but that's basically what it is. It's a strategy to get into the backline of your opponents on the high ground. Like every other strategy as well, it has some advantages and some disadvantages. Where the advantages, I would say, are that it is fairly easy to execute. All you need to know is how to take advantage of the high ground, and you need some minimum communication just to communicate where you want to go and that your team follows you. The most obvious disadvantage is that it takes a lot of time to actually get into those positions, which comes with the risk of losing a teammate while you're trying to get in position. The strategy itself could be broken down into two phases, where one is the setup phase and the other is the actually execution of the strategy. So the first part, the setup, is quite important, as you have to push the payload at least down into the valley before the first point. But it is very important that the payload is at least down in the valley. It would be preferable if it was almost up onto the other side of the valley, but down in the valley should be fine as long as you're not wasting too much time. But I'll come back to this later. The second phase, the execution, is fairly easy. All you need is to respawn at the same time or group up at spawn. And from there you take the stairs on the right side, go up onto the high ground, take the bridge over the little valley, up into the server room on the right side. From there you go through the server room, back onto the high ground behind your opponents. And all of this should be done obviously as fast as possible without losing anyone. So now you are up onto the high ground behind your opponents, which kinda looks a bit weird as it looks almost if you were the defending team and the enemies were the attackers. But now you have the high ground advantage, where you have only narrow paths that the enemies could come from if they want to challenge your high ground position. Which means now your team is on a high ground with your opponents on the low ground and you are basically pretty safe. So all you need to do is use your high ground advantage, try to get enemy hero pick off, and then you can jump down onto the low ground and try to clean up the rest of the team. This would be the best outcome for you, where you could just push the payload the rest of the way and get the first point. Your opponents obviously have some abilities to deal with your high ground position as well. So they could, for example, back up into the valley themselves, which would break the line of sight, so you can't shoot at them from the high ground anymore. And this is where the crucial moment of the setup phase comes in. How far is the payload? So if the payload is still in the bottom of the valley, this would be still good for you, as you can jump down from the high ground, push into the valley from now the former defending side. And as long as the payload is in the bottom of the valley, you still have high ground advantage, and your opponents have to stay on the payload, because if they are not and backing up even further, you can just take control of the payload and the payload pushes away from the enemies, as the first point, you and the payload are all on the same side and you basically traded places with the defending team. If you wasted more time and the payload pushed out of the valley into your spawning direction again, this would be pretty bad, as you would have to go down into the valley and now you would fight up against the defending team on the high ground again, which would be bad, and probably you would have to die and respawn to get a better position, and then you could start the same process again. The best option your opponents have would probably be to use the server room as a retreat point and maybe even get onto the high ground above the valley, which would give them the advantage even though you couldn't reach them from your high ground, and you would have to jump down but still would fight against enemies on the high ground. So this is probably the worst outcome, and if you are on the defending team and you face someone doing the strategy, I would suggest you do that. So that's basically it. To sum it up, the first part is basically how far can you push the payload into the valley. The farther the better, obviously. Then respawn, walk all the way through the server room onto the high ground behind your enemies. Try to get pickoffs. If they back up, jump down and go from there. So if they go into the valley, capture the payload again, take control of the payload and keep the enemies just away from the payload. If they go into the server room up onto the high ground, your best choice is to challenge their high ground position or reset completely, just get killed, die and start over again. That's about it. I hope this was understandable. If you have any questions, just put them down in the comment section. Other than that, thanks for watching and maybe see you in the next one.